So this wire display is really distracting me right now because it's always confusing to see where this wire is actually going. So what you can do, which is very nice, is you can go to the inputs of any component, click with your right mouse button, and there you will see wire display, and you can change the wire display. So in this case, I want to go to hidden, select that, and you will see this indication now that this is linked to something, and if you click on it, it will actually show it to you. But if it's not activated in green, you will see that this is actually now been hidden, and it's just a little bit more cleaner for me to understand what I'm actually doing there and don't have to wonder why is the wire going back, etc. If I always go back and click on this guy, you can see that this is connected to this component here. So just making my life a little bit easier to display that. Now I just want to make sure that I hide this. It's Control Q, right? Maybe I can just take that and push it up a little bit more into the upper domain. Now what we actually want to do is to start shaping up this tower to make it a little bit more interesting. And the way that we want to do that is to control this component here and change the settings that we have currently set for the radius. Now we don't want to have one value that is always applied to all of the slabs, but we actually want to use a Graphmapper now to make this shape a little bit more interesting. And the Graphmapper is a concept that is actually quite mathematical. And if I just type in Graphmapper, let's just quickly see what this component looks like. The Graphmapper is this icon here, and this is how it looks. So if you have nothing hooked up to it, it will look basically like nothing. The one thing that we can do, first of all, is to click with our right mouse button and go to Graph Types and set one graph type. Now, let's just quickly take the Bezier, or the sign here, and you can see that this is in a nutshell a mathematical graph. So it's just basically a sine graph that you can control with those points here. You can change the shape, and this will somehow allow you now to change the values that you have set currently for your floor radius. Now what we want to do actually is to define a graph which is then translated into geometry that we can see here on the tower, which is basically mapped. So this graph type should be mapped to the form of this tower. That's why it's called Graphmapper. So what we want to do is actually take this input here. So I'm going to take a panel quickly and put this up to my list. And this is basically my series here. And you can see that I have this set of numbers, right? And the current map or the current graph of this I can also show you. This is basically by Quick Graph. So if I go to Quick Graph here, this is how it looks. I hook up my panel here, and you will see currently how this numeric list is set up. It's a linear list because that's how it is. It's always just a linear stepping, and it's a straight line that we're resulting in. And I want to change this linear structure of this numeric list into my new graph that is up here. So I have to do something with the stepping of each individual iterations in that list. And this is what the Graphmapper can do. So in order to do that, I have to understand how this Graphmapper works. As you can see here, it has the domain of 0 to 1 for each of the x, y counts, let's say, for this current graph, 2D graph. I can double click into the graph and actually change those if I just want to by scrolling up and down, and this will change the domain. Usually you do not want to do that because this is something you have to do manually. And as more intelligent your script grows, you want to be able to control it in the most efficient way, and you don't want to go back and change something manually in your script. What we want to do actually now is we have to somehow force this list that is from 0 to 230 into a domain from 0 till 1. So it can actually be mapped onto this graph. But let me just demonstrate that. The way that we want to do that is to use a remap component. So we just type in remap. There you go. This is this icon here, the remap component, remap numbers. And it has 3 inputs. And we want to look at the first one, which is the value to remap. It can be one value or it can be a list. So I will just put in my list here in this V. Okay, so these are my values I want to remap. and I will get currently the same result because I have not taken into account the second input, which is the source domain. Now currently my source domain is from 0 to 1, which is not correct because I actually have a different source domain. The domain is just describing my min and max value in that list that I'm supplying. So my min and max currently, if I take again this list here, if I go to my first index, is actually 0. That's the minimum value that I actually have in that list, and the maximum value is 234, right? So a clever way to actually extract those values is by saying bounds. And this one here, min and max bounds. This component will just retrieve your min and max bound of your current list. So if I just hook up my series into that bound, again, Control Alt mouse button to see where it actually is located. It's in math domain. I will now have a domain that is from 0 to 234, as you can see in this info box here. So that's something I will now basically will supply into my S. And what will happen now is that if I copy this panel here and put it into my R, it already has changed the setup or makeup of my list. It has taken my input and it has transformed it into a domain ranging from 0 to 1. That means it has taken the stepping, which was actually defined by the count of 3, and has forced it to be a much lower number to meet that domain of 0 to 1. As you can see, the next value to 0 is 0.0128, and that means that this is now actually my stepping for each of my iterations there. And the target domain is a very crucial thing, is actually the target domain that I want this list to be transformed to. So as a default, it is actually 0 to 1, which we actually need. But if I would now supply a different number, let's say 2 for instance, I would actually have to construct a domain, but actually if I just take in 2, it will take, the min is always 0, and it will take the value 2 to be the maximum of the domain. And now you can see that this list has been shrinked to 2 as a maximum number, okay? So I can just delete it for now. I will show you in a second how to actually construct a domain. But this already works. Now we can work with that list now, this guy here, and supply that to my Graphmapper, okay? And now something will change. So let me show you that. I'm gonna take the same remap list and put it into my Graphmapper here. Nothing has changed because the stepping is always the same currently. And now if I take this Graphmapper and copy that and put this guy here, you can see that the values have changed. The stepping has changed for each individual iteration that goes through that list. So each next neighbor has now not the same stepping, but is kind of mapped to this list here, okay? So now what we actually have, if I put in a slider here again, and I'm gonna put in a panel, it's basically this guy. What we wanna do now is to take this information and supply it to our R. So what we have done now is actually quite interesting. We have supplied our remapped list to our radiuses. And currently this is showing you a error message, which is telling you polygon span cannot be less than 0, of course, because one of our items is actually 0 right now. But we can deal with that. That's not the most confusing thing. The more confusing thing is that our radius now is the maximum that we can actually have is 1 meter. And that's nothing realistic if you look at the tower, right? So we kind of need to do the same thing that we did here and take this list now and remap it again back to something that we actually want. So I'm going to delete everything I don't need. I'm going to copy paste my remap and my bounds. I'm going to copy that and plug in now my outputs from my Graphmapper. Okay, and now what we want to do is actually define a target domain. And the target domain will define what is the min and the max radius of my floor slab. So I'm going to say construct domain. You can see this construct domain icon here. I will get it here, put it into my T, and now I need 2 sliders. The first slider is my minimum radius, so I can just type in maybe 20. hook it up, and my maximum is, let's say, 50. That's the maximum radius of my floor slab, which is a little bit high, but we can change that in a second. And now I'm going to put this radius, the remapped list, into my R. And as you can see, we have now supplied a list of different values for each of those polygons. And we are doing that by controlling it with a Graphmapper and setting the min and max of our domain. So basically here you can see I can control my minimum and maximum radius of my tower. Let's say it's more realistic, something like this, that domain here. And the nice thing now is actually that you are quite free to change the setting of your graph, and this will now be shown live to you, and you can change your tower setting, right? You can do whatever you want to it and change the overall logic, yeah? So if you take that, if you put both of the numbers high in that direction here, this means that min and max are the same. So you somehow have to give them some kind of depth, right? And with this direction here, you can control how much of the sine curve do you want to see, yeah? So again, if I do it like this, you will see half of a sine curve, you can bring a full sine curve, etc. So this is how you can actually control that. And the nice thing about the Graphmapper is it comes with a set of graphs, of mathematical graphs. So you can also take, let's say we go right-click mouse button onto the component and say a Bezier, for instance. And now you can take that to define your tower, right? So if it's something like that maybe, which is weird, but could work, right? You just have to make it work maybe. And you can now really just take those control points here and try to now shape up your tower now. And this could be something that is interesting here, and you can just play along. And of course, now this is something you could work on for ages, right? So the thing that I might usually do is, because you have so many options, I just make a copy of, let's say, some different sets. You can do more copies, of course. And I'm going to go here and change it to, let's say, sine. And, oh, sorry, that was a wrong sign. So I'm going to go to sine here. And then I'm just going to take that input here and then supply this guy to actually see the difference. Now, one really nice feature that has been added to Grasshopper in Rhino 6 is that relay function. Now, the relay function is something, if you double click on the wire, it actually gives you an extra input port, which you can now just plug in your other component settings, like so, and you just have that extra input. Now, that means basically if your components are flying somewhere far away, you can always just click on those wires and work locally on those and change those settings here. So that's how you can jump between two iterations, for instance. Now bring that guy back here. So that is this relay. So if you wonder what happens, if you double click on that, it's basically just a relay, extra port where you can put in information and change the information at that given location. Okay, double click on it, it's gone. Okay, let's take this guy. I'm kind of happy with that right now. Yeah, and continue on with the tutorial. Hi, I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, please feel free to leave a comment, a like, and most importantly, subscribe to this channel. Also note that this video is part of a 13-hour-long online tutorial series called Algorithmic Skyscraper Design. You can find it on my e-learning platform, Design Upgrade. That is courses.design-upgrade.com. To get access to all online courses, just sign up and secure yourself an all-access membership. Choose one of the many courses available with one new added course each month. In the Algorithmic Skyscraper Design, I will take you from zero to hero for practice-based visual scripting inside Rhino. Learn also to create advanced environmental simulations and design user interfaces with Grasshopper. So see you there, and let us make some design upgrades.